All right, we ready to go? Good. Good afternoon. My name is Denise Donahue. I am the CEO of the County Road Association of Michigan. To my left is Ed Noyola. He is our Chief Deputy and Legislative Director. And to his left is Nathan Breyer. He is our featured speaker today, national expert on RUC and why you came. So appreciate everybody coming here to learn about a topic that's very important to Michigan roads, and that is looking over time to move from the gas tax portion of how we fund our Michigan Transportation Fund towards a mileage-based fee for funding that we would pay based on our use of the roads. So simply put, we would be paying for our use of roads, streets, highways by the mile, irrespective of the type of car that we would be driving. So in your packet, just to point out, you have 4 pages showing kind of how we got here. The first one is showing us basically Michigan is selling fewer and fewer gallons of gas every year. This is, I guess, a happy result of having more and more fuel-efficient cars, a little bit about the advent of electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles. But one of the perhaps unexpected consequences of that is we have less and less gas tax going to fund our roads in Michigan. So that's what that chart is about. You have another handout. This is showing the revenue that goes into the Michigan Transportation Fund from gas tax. So you can see it took a jump up with the 2015 transportation funding package, and we can talk you through these afterwards too if you'd like. So we, certainly hit the bottom, I guess, during COVID, the stay-at-home year in 2020. It looks like we're on a trajectory up, but the reality is the 2023 number is 1% higher than the high water mark in 2017. So there certainly is no road commission anywhere that has experienced 1% increase in costs over the last 5 years. So we're just not keeping up with a system that is based on the gas tax. This is our fact sheet on the Michigan Transportation Fund Act, just talking about the number of times it's been amended, the number of times that the formula has changed, and then we also have kind of a simple background graphic here. What are the sources? So state funding is the #1 source of funding that goes into any county or local road department, Michigan Transportation Fund. And so these are the 3 sources that it comes from. So when 40% of your #1 funding source is coming from gas tax and we are selling fewer and fewer gallons of gas, this is why we are at the crossroads in Michigan, needing to look at a different business model for the way that we fund roads. So we're not really breaking any news today, but we wanted to have you all have the opportunity to ask questions as we brought in our national experts. So again, looking at this discussion that is certainly in the Senate's budget, funds $7.5 million, I think, for a RUC pilot program, and the governor's also put it in her budget. House was taking testimony on it this week, so it's a very, very current topic. So simply put, yes, how do we pay for our roads going forward? So we went through the 4 pages. Getting back to the fact that we have less and less gas tax, county road agencies definitely need the $3 billion road funding package that is currently pending in the House, Senate, Michigan legislature. We need that $3 billion now, but at the same time, the state of Michigan needs to begin looking at what is the next generation for road funding, because we are going to continue to see the amount of gallons of gas sold decrease, alternative types of ways to fuel our vehicles. So the RUC, MBUF, VMT, vehicle miles traveled, whatever you call it, is something that we need to get a pilot project going in Michigan. So Ed and I have been speaking out on this for the last 2 to 3 years, and we like to bring experts into the state of Michigan so that we can learn from them. So for 2 days, we've had the privilege of hosting Nathan Breyer here, and just a bit on his biography. Nate is a national RUC, which means road usage charge. He is a national RUC expert. He was recently appointed to the federal government's U.S. Department of Transportation's Federal System Funding Alternative Advisory Board. So the federal government has now seated its committee and is beginning to look at this topic as well. Nathan happens to live part-time in Michigan. He will explain how a mileage-based system for funding roads could work in Michigan. And it's very timely, of course, with the legislature talking about it and other practical insights as our state leaders weigh the options for a sustainable ongoing funding source. So with that, I'm going to introduce Nate.
Thank you. Thank you, Denise. Happy to come here. Sometimes when I hear myself described before I go up, it's like, wow, that guy sounds interesting. And I was like, wait, that's me. So my background is technology and product development, and I got into this space about 11 years or so ago when I got invited to a RUC summit, and that was new to me back then, in Oregon. They were looking to launch a program much like Michigan is thinking about right now, and so I've been in the space ever since. Actually had a product with a small company, and in the last year I actually transitioned to WSP. We've been in the space as well for about that long, and we provide advisory services, among other engineering type services for the transportation space. So with that little bio over, I just like to start with something that is a little bit interesting, and I like to think of this Ben Franklin quote as important to know. There are two certainties in life, death and taxes, but there's a third one, and if you drive, probably road construction too. I'm sure we're all familiar with construction, and it's all near and dear to our heart, especially when you hit a pothole or dive into construction. So with that, I know that Denise gave a little bit of overview of RUC, but here's my thought of RUC in 5 seconds. It's actually a little longer than that, but that's what I like to leave with people, just in case they're not sure exactly what it is. But I'll go ahead and read it. For the past century, every fuel-powered vehicle owner has effectively paid a per-mile fee to support road maintenance. But that rate is varied for everybody. Miles per gallon ranges from dismal, such as a Dodge Challenger with a 6.4 liter Hemi, or to super high, like a Honda Fit with a very small, efficient engine. But road usage charging aims to simplify this model by applying a consistent per-mile fee to all drivers, including EV owners, ensuring a fair and broader funding for a road. I like to bring this up because some people think that RUC is new. Actually, it is not. It actually follows in suit for the fuel tax, which is in effect a per-mile fee, but that's variable, whereas RUC is completely consistent. Everybody pays the same per-mile fee, no matter what you drive. So what's been going on for the past 10 years? So in 2015, when Oregon launched their program, actually it's almost a year ago, they launched in July of 2015. There was only one state enacted the program, and that was Oregon. A couple pilots have taken place in 2015, and that was Minnesota and Nevada. And by 2015, some research had been started and ongoing in Washington and Oregon. And the lighter color states, if you can see that there, are part of a multi-state consortium called RUC America, and they are nibbling around the edges. They are looking at the situation from a research or just seeing what other states are doing. As you can see, a lot of non-activity on the East Coast. Actually, it's not necessarily true. They just didn't have any pilots or ongoing research, but there were meetings. I was involved in a few presentations like this at a very informal level of kind of what they wanted to do. Fast forward 10 years, and here we are in 2025. It's hard to believe I've been involved in this that long. The landscape looks wildly different. So right now we have 4 enacted programs as of July. That'll be the 4th program. We've got Oregon, Utah, Virginia, and Hawaii. Hawaii launches next month. Programs that will be basically, in effect, perpetual programs. They're voluntary right now. meaning that people can either pay an extra fee or the road is a charging program. They don't have to, they're not forced into one or the other, they get to choose. More pilots have happened. These are all the states that have done at least one pilot. Some of these states have done multiple, like Washington, California, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, New Jersey, North Carolina have all had multiple pilots. And there are some states that are doing just pure research. And the difference between a pilot and research is, because obviously there's some research in a pilot, but the research ones, the yellow ones, are just pure research. There's no pilot involved. They're just people doing studies, doing analysis, and producing reports for the state leaders to look at. Those are the ones in yellow have done research. And then obviously there's some multi-state consortiums that are also looking into this. So the Ruck America is still there, and then a new consortium, the Transportation Eastern Coalition on the East Coast, which is made up of, I think, 18 states or so right now. They've been looking into this as well. So we can dive a little bit further into the 4 states that have programs. And as you can see, I do have 5 states on this slide, and I'll explain Vermont as the state that actually has some legislation. They've got policy written for it. They're looking to start in 2027. There's a question mark there because they still have some rate setting and some design that they need to accomplish first before they launch, but they will start. So I consider them as a established program that will be in place where they're collecting money by the mile. So you'll notice that there's some slight differences between the states, and I'll just kind of highlight some of the major ones. That Oregon, Utah, Virginia all have a enhanced registration fee for electric vehicles and hybrids. But the difference is that Oregon does not credit any fuel tax back, whereas Utah and Virginia only go after EVs and hybrids, and they don't do that credit at all. Oregon and Utah both started with OBD2 devices only. Oregon has continued that. Utah is pursuing data collection just from the vehicles directly themselves. Both Virginia and Oregon allow vehicles with an engine, but Virginia is 25 mpg and Oregon is only 20. Now you see the biggest difference is actually in the number of enrolled vehicles. Despite the fact that RUC has been in place in Oregon since 2015, they have a much smaller number than Virginia. And the number one reason there is because Virginia has had their DMV evolve since day one. In fact, the DMV actually runs the RUC program in Virginia, whereas in Oregon, it's still being run by ODOT, and the DMV there in Oregon is still deciding how they want to be involved or if involved at all. And Oregon has done no marketing, whereas Virginia has done a pretty extensive public outreach to make sure people are aware of what the program is. So a little bit different design in Hawaii, and that is they are going after the odometer readings from the annual inspections. So that means that when you go to take your vehicle to an inspection, the state will collect the odometer, and the next time you go in, they'll get a second odometer reading, and then they'll be able to do a comparison between the odometer readings to get the mileage that you had for the year. So there are other states that have inspections, but Hawaii is the first one to try that. And as you'll see, Vermont is going to do a flavor of that as well. Hawaii, a difference there as well is they actually have built into the roadmap basically crawl, walk, run progression from a voluntary for EVs to mandatory for EVs to mandatory for all vehicles. They ultimately would like to replace the gas tax completely by 2035 or so. So that is kind of a high-level view of the programs that are in place right now. So among all the pilots that I've been involved in over the last 10 years, there's some findings and themes of the pilots themselves. The first and foremost is that RUC is a viable concept. It is definitely viable, it's doable, the technology is there, it can be used for supplying all the background and operational needs for a RUC program, and it works. So some people say that it'd be too complex and too many people, but we have perfect examples and precedent set with many uses-based type companies. Biggest one is wireless companies. You know, there's literally millions of phones and transactions taking place every second. So the concept of being able to have the technology to support, 300, vehicles on the road in the U.S. Is quite viable. There's greater clarity when you run a pilot in determining which vehicles you want within your program. Obviously, EVs are one that you want, but you get to determine whether you want to have hybrids or even light-duty vehicles that are different classification, but you would like to include for different reasons. Another finding is that public participation is definitely critical to success. That means you get people out there saying, hey, do you want to be part of a pilot? You might have to incent them or not. Some people are just curious cats and they want to see what's going on. But the point of a pilot is that it increases participation and familiarity with the problem and the solutions available out there to solve the problem. Another thing that is important and the key is that people are very curious about out-of-state drivers. How do you handle them? So with a fuel tax, that's not handled at all. Where you buy your fuel, the tax is applied in the state that you buy your fuel. With a RUC, with the technology and the systems in play, that's a game changer. You can actually start taking that into account if you have location. And even if you don't, you can start building new policy into it because you now have, basically, you've got a way in that you didn't with the fuel tax. So if you're not familiar with IFTA or IRP, those are programs that are there to handle big trucking companies that do multi-state driving on a regular basis. Those programs are set up right now to handle that taxing disbursement among vehicles and states at a large fleet level. RUC is something that would be able to do that at the light-duty personal passenger vehicle level. And then lastly, states that have a strong RUC program usually tend to have legislative backing. And that's something that we're actually doing in these meetings today and yesterday is getting legislators aware of the problem and the solutions that are out there to solve that problem. And the programs, the 5 that I mentioned that are in place right now, have had strong bipartisan support for getting that program in place in the state to solve the gap in funding. That chart, the two charts that Denise showed, one with numbers going up, one with numbers going down, and that gap is just ever growing. That's what RUC is there to solve. So in addition to basically insights for the pilots, there's also insights specifically from public outreach and surveys and whatnot. And what we have found is that the public lacks a general knowledge of RUC itself. And so they, where there's a gap in knowledge, people just make things up to fill in that gap. And so what we're finding is that a lot of people don't know how transportation is funded or how projects are delivered or the amount of effort and the scale of what it takes to actually build a mile of road and maintain it. And the fact that if something has to be maintained, that means that funding has to be sustainable over the long run. And so, when you do a survey, that's one of the first things you'll find out. People they don't understand it. So providing information is part of the reason or purpose of a pilot. You get the information out there, you tell people, but it's not a silver bullet. Just because you get the information, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. Just because you get the information about RUC is and why you need it, you're still going to have people that don't really like it or want to do it. So it's good to actually have an answer for all the folks that don't like it. So even if they don't, it's important to get them aware and understand what's actually happening. There's some perceptions that RUC is unfair to rural drivers, efficient vehicle owners, in-state drivers, driving dependent businesses like Lyft or Uber, things like that. So pilots actually help display those perceptions and actually mitigate them. And obviously it's important that, what's in it for me, People want to know, hey, why do we want to do this? What's specifically in it for me? Am I going to benefit? It's important to actually drive out those reasons during a pilot, so you can present them to people. So I talked about privacy a little bit earlier, and there's going to be privacy concerns. People will say, hey, I'm being tracked, I don't like this, no other program at the state level tracks me like this. Well, I tend to disagree on that, but let's just say that it is an issue. And I think the first thing is not to dismiss the issue. I've been in this space long enough to know that I've become a little bit jaded sometimes on it, but never dismiss this number one concern. Address it head on. These next 4 items actually do help mitigate some of those privacy concerns. So the first one is to provide options. Give people the options that are very low tech and very non-intrusive. Like I said, Hawaii is doing that. You just report your odometer value through an annual inspection that's happening already. There's literally no driving behavior or information shared with the state. And then you can have high-tech solutions if people want to choose it. If you give them that option, believe it or not, some people will choose it because there are some benefits for the drivers of that information, because there's a lot more information in that data that people can actually use themselves. And then 2 sets of things that have to do with policy. The first one is set policy limits that set what the state can and cannot do with the data. So the idea is that the state only gets the mileage and the money. They get no other information. And then you also, if you have a third party doing the data collection, what they can and cannot do with the data, what they're allowed to do, how they should treat the customers, and there should be some oversight into that. And the last one is you can pursue options where the data actually never leaves the vehicle. The only thing that leaves the vehicle is the number of miles in a specific region, and that's the only thing that's left. That leaves the vehicle. So we call that processing on the edge. That's something that we're looking into from a technology perspective. It is doable, but it takes a little bit of involvement from the OEMs, and we're still working on getting OEMs to be involved with that. So in terms of what it takes to actually run a RUC program, there are the high-level things that people get to see, the tangible things. So at the agency level, they actually see the money. That's the whole point of it in the first place. They see a little bit of the data, what they need to have, no more. They also see the customer. The customer sees their own data, the driving information that goes into the RUC. They might see the invoices, and that's pretty much it. They may not see all the underlying activities that are going on that are important for this thing to actually work. You've got the actual account management, you've got the platform, the technology, you have a needed communications marketing. You've got to get the word about this. The actual customer support, when somebody calls up and has an issue, you've got to have somebody manning the phone. We've got operations and compliance. These are all things that go into making a RUC platform successful. And there's going to be a cost for each one of those. So each one of these things can be broken out into 3 different categories. You've got people, product, and support. The people are the folks that are actually manning the phones, or the people writing the policy, or folks involved in rate setting. It's any number of things. Anybody that's got basically a finger within the RUC space, they would be considered part of the people group there. The product itself, I've got a picture of a device there which may or may not be used in the actual product, but the product itself will include the actual website, the phone, the actual method for getting the data from your vehicle to the back end for processing. That would be considered the product. There's a lot of support that goes into that. And then the support itself. This is actually the customer support. Any tier 1, 2, or 3, from a simple problem that, hey, my invoice didn't come in this week, all the way to my data is completely wrong. We have to look into a deep dive into what's going on. That kind of support. Each one of these things does require a cost. And many states have wondered, okay, I know there's lots of costs, but can you boil it down to an actual cost per vehicle per month? And can that cost be brought into a goal of being at 10% or less of the actual revenue that you're bringing in? So basically the cost of collection should be 10% or less. So you've got the 3 buckets there, people, data, and software. And the people can range from $5.20 at low volume and 90 cents for high volume. And the definition of low volume is anything like 30,000 vehicles or less. and high volume would be considered 1 million or more, and medium's in there. But I just did the 2 endpoints. And data costs are going to be from $320 for amortized if you're using a device. Believe it or not, if we use data directly from our vehicle, it might be higher. If we do the self-reporting, that cost is going to be almost zero. So I didn't even put that in there. And then the software costs, and this is going to range from $116 for low volume all the way to 13 cents for high volume. So bottom line is, if you're going to use a device at low volume, you cannot even get close to that 10%. At high volume, you're getting closer, but not there. So answer is there, probably don't want to use a device unless you're okay paying that high of a admin cost. In terms of without a device, you can do this. You can get to your sweet spot once you're at high volume. So question might come up is like, okay, why would I ever want to do a device or have a highly complex portion within my program? And the answer is, well, I've got differences here, and the costs do come down. So I've got operational complexity on the bottom, low to high, and cost to operate, low to high on the left, and you'll see the difference. Manual entry is much less expensive, and aftermarket devices or telematics devices, which are very technology-centric, are at the high end. And so, once again, the question remains, why would I want to do that? And this very, very simple, chart shows if I'm looking at the manual entry, complexity of operation costs are low, but my interoperability is almost non-existent. So what do I mean by interoperability? There's many times, like I said earlier, that if I have this new system, I can use it for different things. And I might want to interop between other states. As I said, with a RUC, I should be able to say who's driving from out of state. I can't do that with a odometer entry. Smartphone, maybe, but with OEM telematics and aftermarket device, I have all that data, and I actually interact easily with other states and other programs. So if the state actually has a tolling program, or if the state has congestion pricing needs, or if they would like to do local area pricing where they know exactly where you're driving to apply rates of where you're driving, that all can be done with the higher technology solutions. Obviously, they seem to be infeasible right now, but that doesn't mean we should dismiss them, because as we know, the cost of technology drops precipitously over years. So if we keep them on the short list of things that we might want to do, it may be something that's on a future path of what we're doing in the state. So, in a nutshell, how do we get to 10% or less? Don't use an aftermarket device at this time. I would say if you're going to do a program, the voluntary programs, as you can see in Utah, Virginia, and Oregon, they're still very low. If the state has the public will of full mandate for at least a specific category of vehicles, probably is the way to go. That way you get to the volumes that you're looking for as quickly as possible. You should find a good source of cheap and free, if possible, data, whether that's smartphone, annual inspections, mandates on OEM, self-reporting. You want that data, and you want it cheap. You'd like to make sure that RUC is not a one-trick pony. So if you are having RUC bear the complete costs of RUC, it can be expensive. If you're sharing the cost of that data and the platform among other use cases, like I said, tolling or congestion pricing, you're starting to spread that cost out, so the cost per vehicle per month for RUC specifically is actually pretty low. And then set the per mile fee high enough to cover the admin costs, and then definitely work with a technology vendor where RUC is not their own business, but they do other things, so that way their own personal cost for RUC is spread out among other use cases internally. I just want to briefly touch on one more issue that people like to think of, and that is the rural issue that this kind of negatively impacts rural drivers. That actually was brought up enough in the Oregon study and pilots that they did a study. Other states have actually followed suit with their own studies just to make sure that the study from Oregon was correct. And all the studies, 100% of them, all come up with the same answer. And that is rural drivers take longer trips, but fewer of them. And urban drivers take more trips but drive fewer miles each, so that results in urban drivers, generally speaking, driving more than rural drivers. So on a per mile basis, rural drivers actually will come out ahead. So there's studies, and I've got a link in the page if you want to look at those studies directly. I want to touch on this slide just briefly, just because it shows the difference in what you pay between like a F-150 and a Prius. Right now, the F-150 is subsidizing the driving of the Prius. Under a RUC, they pay the same per mile. But what's interesting about this slide is that there's a federal portion. Because the federal government is still a little bit slow to the game, there still needs to be basically that variable cost that goes into the federal government. How that will be handled for an electric vehicle still remains to be seen. I'm going to skip a few of these slides. I know time is of the essence, and I'm going to jump right to the last slide, and basically go over, what are the keys to success for a program launch, like a state in Michigan. One is having at least one, more champions. More is better, and that means somebody that's actually really an advocate for this. And I think the state has already got one or two of them. I've talked to a couple of them, and they definitely understand the problem, and they're willing to go to bat for this concept. So the state is ready. As the funding model, like I said, the chart is showing a gap in revenue and income and outlay, and so having somebody that understands that and is willing to go to bat for it. Also, make sure that public awareness campaigns are part of any pilot. Even if they're not part of a pilot and they're done separately, it's very important that the public knows what's going on and that they are aware of the problem and the potential solutions. Just saying the problem is good enough. We also have to display what some of the solutions are. So things like surveys, focus groups, websites are very important for success. And then becoming informed yourself. So at the state level, the legislators and anybody that's involved in the transportation space should be aware of what has been going on, and there are lots of research and reports and final results about all the pilots that have gone on over the last 10 years. So my recommendation is that become informed of what's out there and do a little bit of digging into those things. And then, we've talked about this a little, do a pilot and make sure it's in line with the steps that you want to do ultimately for the state. If the state only wants to do a RUC for EVs, definitely focus on EVs. If the state ultimately wants to do this for all vehicles, make sure that you cover all vehicles in your pilot. Just make sure that what we're doing in your pilot does line up with what you're going to be doing in the program. And then lastly, maybe a little bit self-serving here, but it's still critical, and that's work with experienced people. We've been in touch with some folks that said, we started this, but they didn't know what they're doing. So it's good to actually talk to people that actually have experience in the space. So everyone has to start somewhere, but there's plenty of people that have actually been doing it for as long as I have. So there's vendors in the technology, the service, accounting space who do understand the pitfalls and where we should move and how to avoid things that you shouldn't. So with that, I'm going to end, and thank you for your time.
Stay right here, Nathan, please. Denise, let's come up here for a minute. Before we close out, I just want to let everybody know that this is not a simple task. We have a 100-year fuel tax system, and it needs to be updated. We need the next generation of how are we going to fund our roads and bridges in the state of Michigan. This concept is probably the fairest concept out there right now in order to make sure that everybody pays their fair share. Fuel tax was that, but now it's changed, obviously, with consumption going down and revenue starting to come down. We need to make sure that we do the right thing for the people of Michigan. But that's probably, in the big picture, that's task number 2. Task number 1 is to generate enough revenue right now for what we're doing and how we're distributing the transportation funding. That means $3 billion that the legislature and the governor's office have proposed. We support that concept, an extra $3 billion. It's not an easy task. We respect and we hope that the House and the Senate can come together in whatever way, shape, or form, and whatever method of collecting that revenue, that they can come together and the governor can sign a piece of legislation to take care of that problem. In the meantime, we need to start working on a pilot program in order to promote and to make sure that that revenue continues to flow in to the Michigan Transportation Fund and be distributed to your local road agencies, to the Department of Transportation. So with that being said, I'm more than happy to take some questions or, direct the questions to Nathan and Denise. Because we had a couple of people who show up here a little bit late, I'd like Denise to go through what was in the packet, what's in your media packet for your benefit.
Yep, so again, the first thing that we talked about was that in 2023, Michigan is at an all-time low for the gallons of gas sold, at least in modern history. So other than 2020, we are selling the fewest gallons of gas ever. The pie chart that I showed you is for all Michigan County road commissions, road departments. Their number one funding source is from the state. It's called the Michigan Transportation Fund, and 40% of it is coming from gas tax at the pump. So when 40% of what we use to fix roads is going down and down because we have fewer gallons of gas, that's setting us up for a problem. It's one of the reasons that we can't keep up, and $3 billion road package will help, but gas is going to continue to sell fewer and fewer gallons, and so we have to begin thinking about that next generation. The second graph was simply the MTF revenue that is coming from the gas tax only, so not the license plate. And so we see the result of the 2015 funding package, so 10 years ago, that hit an all-time high in 2018. But as we sat in 2023, it was up 1% in gas tax revenue across 5 years. That does not begin to cover the cost increases that we're seeing on the road system. And then this one is simply a fact sheet about the Michigan Transportation Fund. Been amended over 300 times, 5 times the funding distribution formula has changed. So as far as how we disperse money, it has kept up with the times. The money coming into this funnel is the problem, and that's what we're talking about today. And again, really appreciate Nathan coming in and a lot of expertise on things that we really don't have yet in Michigan in terms of that overhead cost, the cost to administer the system. We're really good at administering gas tax. We've been doing it for 110 years. So now we're starting a new model with maybe a smaller number of cars, and so you've got to amortize that cost. And so, that's an issue. Many of the things that, we just like to bring these experts in and learn from them, and we wanted to put that opportunity out there to everyone else to really understand some of the details, especially as it is part of the working budget.
Yeah. As part of the whole process, and we've learned this by going to Washington, D.C. to talk to the national organizations and providing experts like Nathan here, that it's education, education, education. Those are important to get that out to the public so that they understand that this is not any sort of a shift or addition. This is actually paying for what you use. This is the ultimate user fee, and I think this is a great idea. I look forward to working with Nathan and people like Nathan from across the country and getting some experience from what they've done, what they've discovered. I don't think studies are necessarily out the window, but I think it's time to really start looking at a pilot. And with experts like this, we can actually get out in front. And that's going to be my first question to Nathan is, where do you think Michigan stands as far as, promoting some sort of a MBUF or a RUC concept?
So I think Michigan is on board. I think that the talk I've been hearing last couple of days and previously, Michigan is definitely for a RUC. And I think I'm seeing more movement that is positive. And in fact, Michigan did put in for a grant from the federal government. It didn't get accepted, which is very disappointing, but that didn't defray them. They're actually back at it and deciding to just go forward just with internal monies as opposed to federal monies.
Any questions from anybody in the audience? Please don't be shy.
You mentioned that you were at a committee hearing yesterday from the House as they are figuring out their
That was just a presentation more on RUC and how RUC is going to work. It was not a budget meeting. It was more policy type meeting. Yeah, I thought it went very well. I think we were all singing from the same hymnal. The three groups that spoke, Geo Toll and what was
The
Reason Foundation was the other organization that spoke. We were all singing from the same hymnal that this is the concept that we have to start seriously looking at if we're going to maintain the infrastructure over the next 100 years. And that's key. We need to formulate some sort of a funding system that's going to be sustainable for the state of Michigan.
And I think there were good questions asked, and it was also the first time that I'm aware of that the House has delved into this and wanted to hold some hearings on understanding mileage base. So I think that's a step forward for us.
The money that's been appropriated is in the Senate Transportation Budget Bill. It has not been identified in the House Transportation Budget Bill. They're still working on their bills over there in the House for now. But it's a good lead up to by having that committee here, having us come in and talk about it.
Nathan, is there a transition that takes place once they go from pilot to full implementation of removing gas tax and operating fully on the user fee?
So yes, there's a transition. So usually a pilot has a start, middle, and end. At the end, you usually tabulate and analyze and research your data and come up with basically the final design which you want to implement. And then you start to transition from pilot to program. You basically work on an actual program design, what you did with the pilot, and then you go ahead and implement it. So in terms of transitioning from, pure fuel-based taxing to pure mileage-based taxing, no state has actually done that. I know that Hawaii has put that into their legislation that they want to do that, but that really is part of the design. Do you want to, as a state, do you want to do away with fuel-based taxing completely when there's still usage of fuel that aren't, road-based? And so that's a decision you have to make at the state level.
Right. That's what the pilot's going to, try to get to. Who's going to collect the data? How do we collect the data? Who retains the data? And how do we pay for the mileage usage? So those are all different concepts, and there's their variations of how they do all of those aspects, retaining, collecting, etc. So it's going to be a real challenge to try to put this puzzle all together for the state of Michigan and the Michigan residents. And I think that's why we kind of are promoting, and I think we are promoting, focus groups in order to try to figure out what does the UP want, what does Northern Michigan want, and what does Southeast Michigan want.
That's a good point. Ed and I have been talking about this for 2 years, all around the state, to all of our members, every conference where they'll take us. And the reactions are very different in different parts of the state. In Southeast Michigan, might feel a certain way. Certainly in the Upper Peninsula, Northern Michigan, this whole thing that they talked about, the concept that the rural driver will pay more. The rural driver does in fact drive more miles, and they do that right now. But as they continue to drive, the pickup trucks and the older vehicles, etc., more and more of the burden of funding Michigan roads is shifting onto those rural commuters, rural residents, and our urban folks who are buying newer cars that are more pricey and they're 50 miles per gallon, etc., are shouldering less of the burden of funding roads. And that's where this whole concept of fuel-efficient vehicles is hurting, taking away from the revenues that we would typically have expected for roads.
Any questions? Any more questions? I'm sorry. All right. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
One more. I would assume that this is a part of the process of the pilot program. How does the outreach of the pilot program get started, getting people to be participants, things like that? Or is that part of a conversation that will be had if this goes on?
That's all part of the conversation of the pilot. That'll be included in the pilot. And this is, don't think this is going to happen in 1 or 2 years. This is a long process to collect, to make sure that we get each class of vehicle or fleets and get them into the program. This could be as long as 7, could be as long as 10 years to really get full implementation, and there will be no more fuel tax.
So from our perspective as the County Road Association, it really needs to begin with surveying, focus grouping, finding those different groups of Michigan people across different age groups, the amount, the commuters, that they work from home. We need to understand their thoughts on mileage base, and that will impact, I think, the messaging and, all kinds of things on down the road. But where that certainly needs to be a beginning process, and it can't be random online survey. It needs to be demographically balanced in all the different geographic portions of Michigan. So I think that's partly where our association is at. And I think we're looking long-term to an online calculator where people can, other states have these, and they're pretty cool. So I can plug in my type of vehicle. It knows how many miles per gallon I get. I say how many miles I drive per month, and I'm going to get a comparison between what I'm paying in Michigan gas tax versus 1 cent a mile, 2 cents a mile. Where do I hit parity with that? And I think people need the ability to play around with that themselves on their own time to begin to understand, that it's not as large of a ticket as we might have thought.
It might be a different way to pay, but it's not, hopefully it's not as a higher price for that month of driving. All right, I think that concludes this, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be around for one-on-one conversations.
Well, like,
You guys are great. Make my job easy.